everybody. I know we're going stir crazy at home right now, so I thought I would take some time to share with you a recipe today from one of our favorite cookbooks, our Sauk Prairie cookbooks. This is the Gleaners Favorite Recipes. This cookbook is prized by area cooks. It was a cookbook that was created by the Evangelical United Brethren Church. This is Concordia Methodist today. It's located at 585 5th Street in Prairie du Sac. Most of you might recognize it. It's the large tower that has the blue cross on it at night, lighted up blue cross. This cookbook came in many different colors. There was this yellow cover, you had the green one, the blue one, the red one, and everybody would get excited to collect them. This one belonged to my husband, Jack Barrett, to his mom, Doris, and you could see it was signed here, Merry Christmas 1965 from Mary Page to Dodgy. Her nickname was Dodgy, that was her maiden name, Doris Dodge. So this cookbook was copyright 1965, and when you turn the page, you see that for additional copies, you can contact members of the Cheerful Gleaners class, or you could get it at Shepester's Inc., which was a store downtown in Prairie du Sac, or you could mail orders to Mrs. Robert Giegrick, Giegrick's and Sons print shop, which is still in business, office supply in downtown Prairie du Sac. I thought it was really appropriate. You know, we've all been kind of staying home right now. A lot of us are staying in our homes to stay safe from the COVID-19 virus. And here at the top is a little poem that says, "We may live without poetry, music, and art. We may live without conscience and live without heart. We may live without friends. We may live without books, but civilized man cannot live without cooks." And I gotta tell you, I'm putting on a lot of pounds being at home here during this time. We're eating like crazy between cooking is keeping us busy with meals and always making snacks. So one of the ones I thought we would make today, it's getting to be spring here in Wisconsin, and one of the first things that pops up in many backyards here in Wisconsin is rhubarb. Now, some people have a love-hate relationship. You either love it or you hate it. I'm in the love camp. I love rhubarb. I grew up loving rhubarb. I came from a family where we would just cut it and put it in a pot on the stove with a little sugar and cook it down and create like a little rhubarb stew that we would eat. We made rhubarb pie, rhubarb cake. Other people are more in the hate camp, but I'm convinced that they can be convinced to love rhubarb too, because it's so versatile. You know, it really just depends on what you pair it with, and if you get enough sugar, rhubarb is going to be good. So this recipe today that we're going to make is a rhubarb cake. What I love about these old church cookbooks or community cookbooks is they tell you who submitted them, which is a great part of history in our community as well. And this recipe was submitted by both Pearl Meng and Doris Hosig. Now, I didn't grow up around here, so I don't know those ladies, but later on we'll have our local historian from the Sauk Prairie Historical Society, Jack Barrett, share a little bit about those ladies from what he knows. And maybe some of you in the comments of this post, you can share stories about those ladies and the cookbook and the church as well. Whatever you'd like to add in is always great. So what I love about these kind of cookbooks, you've got to think about how they're made. They ask for submissions, so people would have sent in their favorite recipes, and they probably came in on scraps of paper or index cards, and maybe a church secretary or somebody from the Gleaners group would have compiled all of these and then typed them in. So you can imagine that between deciphering the handwriting on the cards and typing them into this book, there's probably going to be quite a few typos. So the first thing to do in starting to look at these recipes is I always like to read them all the way through before I make them to see if they make sense, because sometimes there can be some really glaring errors. And I've made a few of these without reading them through and just following straight as they're printed. And then I was like, oh man, that did not turn out. And then I went back and I was like, oh, that makes sense. So the very first part of any cooking in Wisconsin, before you start to read through the recipe, is you got to have your sous chef. And in my case, my sous chef is my husband, Jack Barrett. I had him prepare for me a brandy Manhattan because, you know, at COVID time right now when we're self-quarantining, it's 5 o'clock all day. So I have our Wisconsin favorite Korbel brandy here, and I have a Korbel brandy Manhattan here. So as I read through this little recipe for rhubarb cake on page 22 of the Gleaners cookbook, yeah, that's going to help me make sure everything is right. And the first thing I notice here is the very first line says cream together sugar and flour. Boom. I know that that's not right, because if you get to baking at all and you bake and you bake and you bake and you bake enough and you screw up enough, as I have, you know that when you bake a cake, the very first things that get creamed together are always the sugar and the fat. Now, that's usually sugar and butter, or in this case, if you look at the ingredient list, the second ingredient listed here is a cup of shortening. So old Pearl and Doris were going with the shortening on this one. And you can look this up, it's really quite interesting. There's this whole science between whether you use butter or whether you use shortening and what each one will produce and turn out how different they will affect your end product. But in this instance, they're using shortening. So I went ahead and crossed out the flour and put shortening, so that way if I drink too much here, I'll remember when I go to start baking that it's supposed to be cream together sugar and shortening as your first step. All right, I read through everything else and it looks pretty good, looks pretty straightforward, except it does call for a cup of buttermilk. And I don't have buttermilk, so one thing you can do, if you don't have buttermilk, you can use a substitution. So why don't we just get creaming first? Let's just, hold on, gotta put that into place first. Girl, you are not locked down. I see with these cooking show people and chop champions, I'm just not locked into place here. Hold on. No laughing there, cameraman. Hold on, my bowl is not together. I don't know. Hold on. There. Why is it not locking? Get all locked down, bowl. You're all locked down. Okay. I'm creaming now. I'm creaming. All right, while we're creaming, there are two ways you can, two substitutes. There's actually a third one with vinegar, but I'm just going to show you here two different ways you can substitute for buttermilk, because I don't typically have buttermilk at my house. So it's calling for a cup of buttermilk. You can either use a cup of plain yogurt, just plain, none of that flavored business. So a cup of plain yogurt, or another thing you can do if you have a lemon in the house. I got a lemon in the house. Hey! I'm gonna take my lemon. Always like to get all the seeds out of there, you know. Don't want no seeds in your business. All right, and I'm gonna squeeze about a tablespoon or so, and I'm just gonna eyeball that. About a tablespoon of lemon juice into my cup. And then what you're gonna do, I'm getting creamed over here, is you're gonna get your milk. Oh, I already got it out. And you're gonna bring the rest up to 1 cup. Just a little under. Need a little bit more. So, then you're gonna stir this. That's all I got. See, we've been on COVID now, day whatever. I haven't been to the grocery store in a while, so. You're gonna stir this, and you're just gonna let this sit for a while. And that's the acid in the lemon, or the lemon juice, is gonna cause your milk to go sour and to create that buttermilk substitute. Okay, so that's another option for buttermilk. All right, this is looking good and creamed over here. I'm glad we got that lockdown situation under control. That was kind of scary at first there. Whew, girl, it never happens when I'm not being recorded, of course. That's the story of my life. All right, next, add beaten egg. I forgot to beat the egg before I put it in the bowl. All right, so beat yourself 1 egg. And add that to the mix. I like to leave my egg out at room temperature for a while before I put that in there. It's just kind of nice. All right, put that egg in there. Next, it says to add the soda and the buttermilk. It says put the soda in the buttermilk and add. So when it says soda, for you youngsters out there, that doesn't mean we're gonna add some Pepsi or Diet Coke or Sundrop. They're talking about baking soda in this instance. So I've got my teaspoon of soda, as the older ladies call it, and I'm gonna bake this cake with I'm really curious, I've actually never done this before, so experimenting. I'm using the yogurt. So we're using a cup of the yogurt, and I'm gonna put my baking soda, mix that into the yogurt. I'm thinking with all the moisture in the yogurt, it could be interesting to see what that does to the cake. Now, we're gonna add this in next. Some of those fancy cooking shows, they keep their mixer going, but that makes me nervous. I always stop each time. And you'll notice I'm also not wearing an apron. I thought about putting an apron on. I have one somewhere, but I don't wear an apron when I cook. I don't know if it's just me, but if I get stuff on my hands, I usually just wipe it off on the back of my pants. So I'm not going to be pretentious here on this historical cooking show. I'm just going to keep it real for you here in Prairie du Sac. So we're going to let that do its thing. Starting to look good. It's all getting creamy in here. Next, it wants us to add salt, flour, and rhubarb. Now, it does not say how much salt to add. It just says salt. Don't get too nervous about that. You really can't screw this up. So, I got my trusty Morton here. I'm just gonna, that looks about right, for salt. Just salt in there. People in the Midwest are polite, so even if you put too much salt in and you invite your friends over, they're not going to say anything anyway. All right, so I've got my salt in there. It's asking for 2 cups plus 1 tablespoon flour. Oh, I forgot I got this thing. I don't know. You got one of these things to put on. It helps the flour go in a lot easier. That way you don't make a huge mess in your kitchen. These cookbooks are kind of fun because, I think that people submit recipes that they're very proud of. So maybe it's a recipe that they use a lot maybe when they were entertaining, or one that they used with their family. So that if they were willing to turn it into their church or their organization, that it's one they were proud of. So it's always nice to try these, and it's kind of fun to see if it works, because with some of these vintage recipes, our ovens might be a little different, or what we're doing today might be a little different, so it's fun to to try flavors that we might not be regularly putting together these days. So I enjoy these. All right, now we're ready for the rhubarb. I find that a lot of times with any recipe that calls for a fruit, or pies or anything, I tend to put in more than what they actually say. I know, you're supposed to follow the recipe, but I just like more fruit. And especially with pies and cakes and stuff, I just really like fruit. But you gotta be careful with rhubarb because it can be kind of wet and moist in your recipe. It can add a lot of moisture. So, you know, you don't want things to end up runny. Nobody likes a runny dessert. But I do like extra. So sometimes I'll put in, like, it's calling for 2.5 cups rhubarb, but I just threw in a little extra. Now we have the red and green variety of rhubarb in our garden. I really like that kind. The redder the rhubarb, the sweeter it is, but I kind of like the mix of the red and green because then you get that nice balance between tart and sweet. And it asked for the rhubarb to be chopped finely. I like my rhubarb a little thicker. She's thick. I like that because when I bite into a rhubarb cake, I don't want teeny tiny little pieces of rhubarb. I am there to celebrate the rhubarb. So I want great big pieces of rhubarb when I bite into that cake, when I take a nice big slice of cake. I think Alexa thinks I was talking to her. Maybe she wants a piece of rhubarb. Alexa, stop. Alexa, I'm not talking to you about rhubarb. Don't be jealous. Okay, so I got everything in there now, and she wants me to pour it into a 9x13 pan. So let me just show you what this looks like. Of course, now I got this on lockdown and never gonna get it off. Okay, here it is. It's very white and bright, got the nice big chunks of rhubarb the way I like it. Of course, if you like it finely chopped, you do you. That's what cooking is all about. You know, don't be intimidated to follow the directions. You know, I think cooking is a lot like art and a lot like building. You know, if you're a craftsman, if you're into building stuff or designing things and making art, whatever your thing is, it's just like that. You know, you just do you. It's just like the way you dress. You know, we all dress a certain way. You do your recipe. You know, if you like a little more spice, if you like your rhubarb a little chunkier, go for it. You want to put in a little more salt? My former mother-in-law, we call her the butter queen. She's putting butter. I have never seen a woman go through more sticks of butter in my entire life. But, you know, that's awesome. I just know that I can visit her and celebrate butter. It's great for the dairy industry. Love to support the dairy industry here in Wisconsin. Anything I can do to put yogurt, milk, all these great dairy products. Support my dairy people. Okay, now we are going to put a topping, sprinkle topping over here. Now, here's where I was going to lick this, but with COVID-19, I'm really trying hard, people, to be conscious about putting my fingers in things, my face, touching my face. Okay, so here's the thing. With this topping, it's calling for sugar, cinnamon, and nut meats. Now, all little kids out there are gonna say, Mom, don't put nuts on this, no nuts. There's always that classic debate, especially when it comes to brownies, where people are either put nuts in it, don't put nuts in it, whatever. In my house, I have kids who are like, don't put nuts on it, please don't put nuts on it. But I'm here to tell you, the thing about nuts, and I have in here some beautiful nuts. The thing about nuts are essentially, it's just another way to insert fat, okay? Because when you're grinding up these nuts and releasing the oil from the nut, and then you're gonna put that on top, and it's gonna go in the oven, and it's got sugar and cinnamon, you're essentially adding another dimension of fat flavor. And okay, let's be honest, here we are, and what do we celebrate in Wisconsin? The beauty of flavor and good times and fat, and it's all about that. I mean, if we're gonna be eating a cake, let's do this right, okay? So the nuts really do add another dimension of flavor to things. So I really urge you to show your children and to show people who don't particularly think about nuts or care for nuts. Now, if they're allergic, that's another thing, but to try the nuts, because it really does add another layer to the situation. So it says, sprinkle topping of sugar, cinnamon, nut meats. So we're just gonna mix these up here. This bowl. Sugar. It's a 1/3 cup of sugar, 1/3 cup of nut meats, and the cinnamon. I always use Penzeys Spices for my cinnamon. If you've never been to Penzeys Spices, they originated out of Milwaukee area, and there's a Penzeys Spices in Madison, down near the University Hospital there. Amazing. Start with the cinnamon and the vanillas at Christmas time. If you've never been, start there and then branch out. Their spices are really flavorful. They're expensive. You're gonna spend a ton of money there once you get in there, but it's gonna be worth every penny, because it will change your life, because it's just so much more flavorful. And I love their, they've got one called pizza seasoning. So if you buy, like, let's say you're somebody who makes like freezer pizzas, you can sprinkle that pizza seasoning on top of the freezer pizza before you put it in the oven, and it just takes things to the next level. I like their pork chop seasoning too. I will put that on top of pork chops before I put it in the oven, along with their Italian seasoning, and just cook those pork chops for, 20 to 25 minutes. People are notorious for overcooking pork. I keep it a little on the low side there, because pork can be beautiful if it's not dry as a bone. So it's another one of my favorite seasonings. So here we have this topping going on. Oh girl, this is gonna be good. Thank you, Doris and Pearl, for giving me another cake to put my rhubarb in. Ooh, this is good, this is good. Now this is the kind of thing you want to have with, I'm not typically a coffee drinker, I like tea, but this is something I would have a cup of coffee with. Classic, your John Joseph coffee. This would be great to have a cup of nice black coffee with a little bit of, and the other thing, when this comes out of the oven, we're gonna get some nice vanilla bean ice cream. That will be nice to go with this, just something really simple. Oh, that looks good. Now, this is gonna bake in the oven. It says 350 degrees for about 50 minutes. So we're gonna let that do its thing, and then we'll be back to see what it looks like.